When we picture historical conquests, we imagine armies marching toward the horizon with weapons drawn. But one of the most effective invasions in human history started with a simple handshake and a request to do business. In 1600, India was a global economic powerhouse. The Mughal Empire controlled a staggering portion of the world's wealth, with cities that dazzled European travelers and markets overflowing with highly sought-after silk, spices, and indigo. Compare that to a small group of London merchants gathered thousands of miles away. They had no standing army and little global influence. All they possessed was a royal charter signed by Queen Elizabeth I, allowing them to form the East India Company. Their early attempts to reach India were grueling. Ships spent months battling the ocean. Storms shattered masts, and disease spread rapidly through cramped cabins. Men regularly died long before seeing land, all to acquire a few shipments of pepper and cotton. Yet within a few generations, those vulnerable merchants would control kings and command armies across the subcontinent. How did the struggling startup manage to dismantle an immensely wealthy empire without triggering a massive military response? They succeeded by hiding in plain sight. They bypassed the standard defenses of a sovereign nation because they perfectly mimicked a harmless commercial enterprise. Knowing they were outmatched, the company's representatives acted exactly as guests should. They bowed before local rulers, offered expensive gifts, and spoke softly, asking only for permission to build basic trading posts. Once permission was granted, those simple trading posts began to change. Slowly, walls grew a little thicker, the gates became heavier, guards appeared at the entrances, and cannons mounted along the perimeters. The company recognized that relying on local rulers for security left their highly lucrative shipments vulnerable. To guarantee their growing profit margins, they needed to supply their own defense. What started as hiring a few local guards rapidly escalated. The corporation took the significant step of recruiting thousands of Indian soldiers to serve directly under British officers, eventually fielding an entire private military. That decision changed the trajectory of the corporation. When a business arms itself with a private military, its calculus shifts. It stops negotiating like a merchant and begins dictating terms like a sovereign government. As the central power of the Mughal Empire began to fracture, regional rulers grew independent and old alliances dissolved. The company watched this happen and adapted, using their wealth to fund rival princes and intentionally deepen local divisions. By buying loyalty and selling protection, the merchants became the regional puppet masters, manipulating local politics to serve their ledger. This political manipulation reached its peak in 1757 in Bengal, one of the richest and most fertile provinces on earth. The local ruler feared the company's growing strength, leading to a confrontation known as the Battle of Plassey. But the company's military leader, Robert Clive, bypassed a traditional fight. Before the first shot was fired, he used corporate funds to secretly bribe key commanders in the Bengali army. When the battle commenced, those commanders simply stood still and refused to fight. With the province defeated from within, the East India Company dropped the act of mutual trade. They took direct control of Bengal, acting as the absolute ruler and chief tax collector for millions of people. The financial extraction that followed was staggering. Company employees funneled the region's vast resources back to England, returning with personal fortunes so massive they earned the nickname Nabobs. They used this wealth to buy vast estates and secure political influence within the British Parliament. The victory at Plassey altered the company's core mission, replacing the goal of mutual trade with a mandate for unilateral wealth extraction. For ordinary citizens, this corporate governance was disastrous. Farmers were hit with crushing taxes, artisans lost their livelihoods to monopolies, and communities fell into deep poverty. The breaking point arrived in 1770, when a massive crop failure triggered a catastrophic famine across Bengal. Food vanished from the markets, and millions of people began to starve. This diagram maps the crisis in stark terms. As the line graph on the left shows the population of Bengal collapsing, the bar chart on the right displays the company's tax revenue remaining steady. Even as fields were abandoned and villages emptied, The company continued enforcing aggressive tax collection so that dividends for investors in London would not dip. The famine exposed the brutal logic of the East India Company. In their administrative model, the survival of human beings was mathematically subordinated to the protection of corporate profit. Decades of aggressive taxation, lost sovereignty, and enforced poverty eventually saturated the region with anger. By the mid-1800s, the Indian subcontinent was highly volatile. The breaking of a final boundary ignited the tension. A rumor spread that new rifle cartridges were greased with cow and pig fat, violating the core religious restrictions of both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. In 1857, ordinary citizens, local rulers, and the company's own soldiers initiated a massive rebellion across India. The violence raged for months, shocking the government back in London. British lawmakers were forced to admit that outsourcing the administration of an entire subcontinent to a board of private investors had been a catastrophic failure. In 1858, Parliament officially intervened. They stripped the East India Company of all governing authority, legally transferring total control of India directly to the British Crown. After nearly 250 years of operation, the corporation that had commanded armies and extracted wealth was dismantled. It was removed from power and eventually faded from existence. The East India Company remains a warning of what can happen when profit is allowed to rule human lives. Their story demonstrates that if left entirely unchecked, a corporation's pursuit of profit can lead to the destruction of entire nations.